All right, so let's spend a little bit of time talking about the social influences on sport participation and the purchasing of sporting goods. Social influences tend to fall into the following categories: personal friends, reference groups, opinion leaders, family influencers, social class, and culture and subculture. So let's start with personal friends are among the most important influencers. They influence participation in a particular sport and purchase of all sporting goods. For instance, your likelihood of belonging to a fitness center goes up dramatically if you have friends who are also members at that fitness center. I play golf with a group of friends who've been playing together for the last 10 or 12 years. We very much play the same brands of clubs, the same brands of balls. We tend to find out what each other has purchased in terms of bags and shoes and those sorts of things. And so we certainly influence each other a lot in terms of the particular sporting goods that we buy. Also, other memberships, members at places like Lifetime Fitness or the country club where we all belong. And then there's, of course, the participation in sports in general. If all of your friends are bicycle riders or rock climbers, the chances of you being one is greatly, greatly increased. The next social influence are things called reference groups. There are different kinds of reference group. There's a friendship group. There are membership groups. These are groups of where there is some sort of a card-carrying members of the Elks, members of some sort of a organization, aspiration groups, and then disassociative groups. Disassociative groups are groups that you want to make sure that everyone knows you're not a member of. These obviously influence participation and the purchase of particular sporting goods. And once again, fitness centers, sporting goods items, individual sporting goods brands, memberships, and participation in particular sports. If my aspiration group all do one thing, guess what? I'll be doing the same thing. If all my friends are doing one thing, I'll be doing the same thing. If I have a group of people who I want to not associate with do something, I'll make sure that I don't do that so that I am not confused with a person that belongs to that particular group. Next, we have opinion leaders, and of course, this refers to word of mouth and e-word of mouth and opinion leaders. This is an area that's changed dramatically by social media. After all, social networks are all about individuals communicating with each other and in some cases influencing each other. Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, TripAdvisor, Amazon, Yelp, Rate My Professor, etc. are all examples of social media platforms that encourage opinion leadership and word of mouth. But even though these are influential, all the research that we've done concludes that personal opinion leaders, friends, co-workers, etc., still have the greatest influence. Different kinds of opinion leaders. There are endorsers, spokespeople, people who provide testimonials, people who are reviewers. Online, we like to refer to these people as influencers. We have critics, mavens, and experts. And in the purchase of sporting goods, you'll see lots of different people making lots of different comments about a particular golf club, for instance, and whether or not it's the right club for you. It certainly influences participation and the purchase of sporting goods like the other areas of social influence do. Some of the characteristics of opinion leaders that will influence whether or not you listen to them, their knowledge and expertise, whether or not we think that they are independent, that is, they are not being paid for their opinions, whether we find them to be credible and likable and familiar. And then there's always the value of numbers. That is, I'm much more likely to follow someone who has 150,000 followers rather than someone that has 30 followers. There are family influences. The family influence works as a socialization agent and roles. And of course, we influence our children in terms of which sports they are likely to participate in, but to some degree, they also influence us. And then there's a family life cycle stage. And of course, this is bachelors to empty nesters to solitary survivors. And of course, the family lifestyle stage certainly influences what particular sports we're more likely to participate in, along with age and income, but also sort of whether or not we have time to participate in certain sorts of sporting activity. Family life cycle stages, we have the young family life cycle stages are single, married without children, married with children, and divorced with children. And then we go into middle age and we have a few more categories. And then as we get older, we have older married or unmarried, and those all influence our participation in various sports and activities. For instance, if we're older and unmarried, we are probably more likely to participate in socially oriented sporting activities and fewer solitary sporting activities. Family influences, there are two types of family influences. There's a spouse dominant influence, and then there's a family member roles influence. Think about your children. Your children probably participate in the sports that you want them to participate in. So if you want your kids to participate in Little League or Bobby Sox softball or tennis or bowling or golf, that determines what kinds of lessons you provide with them and what sorts of opportunities you provide them to participate in those particular sports. One of my favorite stories about family influences is that whether you like it or not, you are eventually turning into your parents. I know that's a frightening thought, but all the data shows that over time, you will act more and more like your parents, and your parents' influence on your purchasing will definitely come through over time. And then finally, we have a social class. And of course, the book talks a lot about social class. Social class is not a very good predictor of sport participation, but we still have some social class. This is a much bigger issue on the East Coast than out west out here. But obviously, things that influence social class are education, occupation, income, and then interests. And so the idea of interest then refers to the kinds of activities and sports that you might participate in might, to some degree, be based on your social class status or the social class that you aspire to be part of, which is perhaps a better predictor. What's the most important predictor of social class? Well, it's not income. Obviously, the best predictor of social class turns out to be education and job. But understand that social class does influence your participation in specific sports and the particular sporting goods that you might own. There are socio-cultural influences. This is cultures and subcultures. Cultural influences are things like, buying patterns based on your ethnicity. You think about food as being one thing that is ethnically driven, but so are the particular sports that you follow. If you're from certain cultures, soccer is a much more likely to participate in things like soccer, and if you're from different sorts of cultures, maybe you're much more likely to participate in something like golf or tennis. And then, of course, with cultures, we have subcultural influences. All right, and there are lots of subcultures. Religion is a subculture. A gang would be a subculture. A fraternity or sorority or club would be a subculture. And there's a UNLV student subculture. Some other subcultures that you ought to be familiar with if you're in the sporting business are things like Raider Nation, the UNLV Rebellion, And even things like being a lifetime fitness member or a member of a country club. I belong to a country club. There is a subcultural influence among people who belong to that particular club. So you need to be aware of these if you're a sports marketer and understand that they influence both participation and the purchase of specific sporting goods and brands of sporting goods.